I do this for black liberation, and I ride with Zulu nation. Movement, emotion, and creation. SSF refiguration. Yeah, you can do that. I wake up reading Marcus Garvey. Yep, I wake up reading Marcus Garvey. I wake up reading Marcus Garvey. I wake up reading Marcus Garvey. I wake up. Hey, black at it again. Black August and I'm fasting again. Hold up the government, tell them we here. We George Jackson packing it in. Never slacking again. Ahead of the game, we ain't asking to win. Revolution every time we begin. Reinvent self, then reinvent them. See, oppression they honest. That's why we can afford college. My war cry be the loudest. Living the statement some knowledge. Freedom costs a fortune. Get off this. I'm watching. And pigs instead of your corners. So next time we be watching. Shoot, that fight like COVID. Freedom or death, you know me. Only the rich get a piece of the plate. And they can still give a fuck about state. That's about people not taking to your plate. That's about people not taking your plate. Hey. We do this for black liberation. And we ride with Zulu Nation. Movement in motion, the formation. SSS prefiguration. So wake up reading Marcus Garvey. 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 Assam Shakur, keep their hands off. Assam Shakur, keep their hands off. Yo, what's the code? We gon' free them all. Yep. What's the code? We gon' free them all. Maroon. We gon' free them all. Melina. We gon' free them all. Matulu. We gon' free them all. Stay tuned. We gon' free them all. FBI, them on KKK. LRPD, KKK. CIA, them on KKK. So, blast away. FBI, them on KKK. CIA, them on KKK. I do this for black liberation. And I ride with Zulu Nation. Movement in motion, the formation. SSS prefiguration. Go get yourself some Marcus Garvey. 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 Everybody.
Welcome, everybody. This is People's Strike, August 1st broadcast, and I'm very honored to have with us President of the United Teachers of Los Angeles, Cecily Myart-Cruz. Welcome, Cecily. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Yes, thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. I want to first ask you a question just about how do we deal with the fact that women of color, working class women, are at risk in the ill-conceived plans to reopen schools? What are y'all dealing with? How are y'all dealing with that in Los Angeles? And what are your thoughts about around the country?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think the biggest issue is, COVID-19 lays bare all of the inequities that BIPOC folk are being saddled to deal with. And so the issue here in Los Angeles is making the decision to say we're not coming back into the buildings, and not because our educators don't want to, it's because we're looking at health and safety. And if we're looking at health and safety, then that goes across the board of what we have to do, not only for our members, but for the students and the communities we serve. This is very important to keep that at the forefront of our minds when we talk about this. And this is exactly what we did in March when our mayor, the governor, and our superintendent did not want us to close the schools. And we made a decision on the 11th of March, held a press conference on the 12th of March, and the schools were shut down on the 13th. So in that same fashion, we were looking at what, getting the information from our bargaining team, going to our executive board, and then just letting the public and letting our members know. We wanted to actually hear like a pulse of where they were. And 83% of our membership said they didn't want to reopen physically. And so now it begins to really talk about this crisis distance learning and what it can look like, and how we need to have a robust program in place for our most vulnerable students.
Mm-hmm. Do parents support that?
Some.
Mm-hmm.
Some parents really support it, have applauded the work that we're doing. But then, of course, we have other parents that are like, get back to work right now. Mm-hmm. Open the schools. The unions are keeping the schools from being open, and that is just not correct. When we're looking at the health and safety, and we're looking at here in California, specifically in Los Angeles, the surge of coronavirus cases have started to burgeon. I mean, it's really exploding. And in good conscience, we just could not say that in 5 weeks, things will be back to normal, whatever that was anyway. Mm-hmm. For folks to be able to go back physically into schools.
I was going to ask that about before. So before the pandemic, what were the major concerns of UTLA, of educators and parents, and how has COVID exacerbated those issues?
Well, yeah, the big issues are what? Mental health, making sure that we have a nurse every day. We have a nurse shortage already. And that was one of the things that we won in the strike, was to have a nurse by this coming, September, to be able to say a nurse in every classroom, class sized. And so then when you put the pandemic squarely in the middle of all of that, we still need nurses. We're going to need a lot of them. We're going to need mental health professionals, that's psychiatric social workers, counselors, psychologists, pupil service attendants. We're going to need grief counselors. That's also something very real. And then we need lower class sizes. There's no way, some of our inner city schools have classes that are like at 50, 55, and you're talking about, 6 feet social distancing. I don't see how that happens in a middle school class. I don't see how it happens on a high school campus. I don't see how it happens in a kindergarten classroom, to be honest.
And I know in Philly, issues about ventilation are an issue. Is that true in LA?
Absolutely, because, that's one of the biggest things, like in the Valley, where we have, it's like super hot. We, sometimes kids are not able to go outside because it's so hot. The asphalt is so, hot out there, scalding. So folks have to stay in. When you have HVAC or air conditioning that's not even working, let alone in the summer, it's usually blowing heat. In the winter, is usually blowing air. That's what happens here. Then you have this issue. And so, like, what do you do? Like, there's only so many outside spaces and places that you could be. It's just not safe. It's just not safe.
Let me shift gears a little bit and ask what you see as the potential and the challenges for radical labor unions to fight white nationalism and fascism.
Very good. So I would say we have to get into this racial equity work. Absolutely. We only have two choices. Either you're going to be racist or you're going to be anti-racist. And if you're going to be an anti-racist educator, then we've got to be able to break down systems, institutions, policies, dismantle white supremacy culture. And we've got to be doing that not only in union buildings, not only in community orgs, we've got to do it in actual school buildings as well. Mm-hmm. And so when we're not prioritizing, curriculum like ethnic studies programs that actually lift up and affirm the experiences of our students, then there's something to say about that, right? We have, it's just the way that it is. We have a dominant culture. It's been that way for a long time, decades and decades. But then you're like, how can we use this crisis to begin to see something different? And I like to say we're at the crossroads of horror and hope. And so with this pandemic and how COVID-19 just lays bare all these inequities, like we're seeing, and this whole racism that's actually bubbled up to the fore with, George Floyd, 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Nobody was at the farmer's market, the Pilates studio, yoga studio. Nobody was anywhere. They were in front of televisions, in front of tech devices to watch someone's life be murdered. And as a biracial Black woman, like this is what I've seen and colleagues have seen all the time. This is the first time that people actually saw, like, the rose-colored glasses were off and people were like, I can't believe it, right? And then now we ushered in 52 days of actual Black Lives Matter protests. So we have this horrific thing that happens. George Floyd becomes a catalyst for change. Not to mention, this is a great day to say Breonna Taylor's murderers need to be caught. So we want to make sure that we say that, all throughout the ethers. But just that kind of horror to like righteous indignation and then righteous action. How do we then move? How do we move from the incapacitating fear and, the uncertainty and the doubt and I don't know what my life is going to look like? How do we move to actual action to say, you know what, you're right, enough's enough? How do we start to actually change our school buildings? How do we start making legislators understand what we're talking about and having them create legislation and bills that reflect the needs of the communities that they serve?
One more question about the horror. I'm wondering about how we can organize ourselves to fight the Trump administration's blatant push for school privatization and the funding under the cover of COVID. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, first we have this national kind of group, national labor and community orgs that are coming together for August 3rd, Day of Resistance, right? To really try to hit at the national level, not only to Trump, let's call it what it is. Like, we also have to hold Biden accountable. To say, we have to hold every corporate Democrat accountable. Republicans just don't get that mark. It's everyone who is standing in the way of justice, standing in the way of what needs to happen, and really creating a social safety net for our people, right? I like to think in terms of equity, but really deep down, I really want to talk about liberation and how we get a full liberation of people. And that when we say Black Lives Matter, folks are like, it's like, it's inclusive of a statement. Even the Navajo Nation realizes that 87 years after a bigot says Washington Redskins, it takes this uprising right now of Black Lives Matter to realize that it's going to be called the Washington football team now. And that means that we can realize through Black Lives Matter, we can realize that dismantling of white supremacist culture of indigenous folk, right? That the Blackhawks, the Indians, the Braves, like all of those names are going to fall down when that happens. And through the Black Lives Matter movement, we will see the end of the incarceration of children, Latino children, being caged at the border. So through all of this, we are going to see some change, and that is the hope, right? Because we've got to be looking for the North Star, which is really our students. Like, I don't say that students are the future. The students are the now. Those babies are the now. And we have to realize a dream that is so radically different that it shifts the very ground that we walk on, that we change every single narrative because we must.
President Cecily Myart-Cruz, thank you very much for your wisdom, your passion, your commitment. We are so honored for you to come on the People's Right broadcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And this is Matt Meyer for People Strike Broadcast. Honored and pleased to have a group of New York City community activists, organizers, and people concerned with education in this time of resistance and crisis. I'm going to step back, even though I have a history as a teacher inside the New York City Department of Education, now retired, thankfully, in some ways, because I have also children in the system, so I'm a parent. And thinking about September, we start in September, most of the rest of the country starts in August, is not a happy thought. The only happiness is about it is how we can build the resistance. And I can little think of better people to talk about this issue than the folks that we're going to be talking with right now. I'm going to pass the baton to Tanesha Grant. She's the founder of Parents Supporting Parents New York. They themselves, as an organization, she herself, are involved in many coalitions that you'll hear about, and many efforts on many fronts, locally and nationally, to lead the resistance in terms of having folks just give up their lives for capitalism, for white supremacy, and for other folks. Tanesha, an honor to meet you here and have you with People Strike Broadcast.
Thank you, Matt. It's an honor to be here with my warrior sisters that have this conversation with you. Like Matt said, I am Tanesha Grant. I am the founder and CEO of Parents Supporting Parents New York. We unapologetically help parents that are marginalized, whose voices are not often heard and pushed to the side. We advocate in our communities. We help our communities as much as we can. And like Matt said, we are part of a lot of coalitions, but I will talk more about that later. I want to now pass it off to introduce Meryl to introduce yourself.
Oh, hi. I was not expecting to be called on first. Hi, I'm Meryl. I'm the founder and director of Polyfem, which is a group of young femmes. We're working because we want political power. And so like Tanesha, you know, we very closely together, doing organizing, planning marches and things. So I guess I'm gonna pass it.
Hey y'all, I'm Taj Sutton, president of Community Education Council in District 14. And for folks who might be unfamiliar, we basically act as a liaison between the Department of Education and local school communities. In a perfect world, we'd be able to get what our schools and our families need from the DOE. We can delve a little bit deeper into that later as to why that becomes rather difficult. I'm also an arts educator, and I run Young People of Color Incorporated, which is a grassroots collective of small business owners, creatives, teachers, parents, and students working together through advocacy and art to shift paradigms. Yeah, that's about it. And just author, advocate, all around. You know, we care about kids, everybody here. We care about kids, we care about education, and we care about the fact that folks are not getting what they need. And so that's why we do what we do. I'm going to pass it on to Naomi.
Thanks, Taj. My name is Naomi Pena. Before I always address myself, I say I'm a born and raised New Yorker, born and raised in the Lower East Side. And I'm always even more grateful that I can raise my 4 kids in this neighborhood because by way of gentrification, that is not the case. Currently, I am the president of the Community Education Council for School District 1, which encompasses the Lower East Side and the East Village. Having been born and raised in this community, I know my community very well. My friends, the few that are left here, our parents here, and I have a well-networked, established relationships with the community-based organizations that we have that have been running for over 120 years in this neighborhood, servicing low-income families and immigrant families. And during this time of complete unrest, because it's not just civil unrest, it's like complete economic and personal unrest for a lot of people, I think our roles have evolved. All of us on this call are community organizers in many different ways, but the sense of urgency of action has, I think, developed in a way where the days of us opting into which way we want to advocate is no longer. We have reinvented the way that we have to lift our voices to help those who are in dire need, which is a lot of communities of color, which is all the communities of color, but a lot of more New Yorkers who are low income and in poverty.
Thank you, Naomi. And as we know, this is not a new problem. This has been generations and generations where it was a problem for our children to get adequate education, quality education. So I just feel like it's just, we just have technology now. And they're still telling us that we're not good enough to get what other people have, or that our children are not good enough to have clean water in their schools or soap in their schools. And now they're telling us that we have to make do with like $2 billion less. How do you guys feel about that?
I think this is nothing that's new. Like you said, we consistently have gotten the short end of the stick in this country, to be honest. Anytime there's economic unrest, the first place they start cutting is education. And my argument has always been, we want to cut places, but yet, as we have all been saying, defund the police. We never cut military, we never cut law enforcement. As a matter of fact, we keep their budgets intact or we give them more. Why? There's a direct correlation between economic unrest and policing the very same people that experience the economic unrest.
Say that.
So there is no mistake that the reason the NYPD got lost the little that they lost, because let's be honest, they really didn't lose the money. They just shifted monies around. But then they cut summer youth. They cut every single programming that the youth needs. They cut basic things that the youth needs to enjoy themselves. Beaches, pools, access to other organizations. And what happens? It's a vicious cycle. Our youth are now in the street, convening with their friends. Sometimes things happen, whether it be bad or good, and who's there to police them? The NYPD, who gets a bank off of the OT, the overtime that they're allowed to use. And then it's a vicious cycle. Then we're dealing with more incarceration rates, which then leads to more disenfranchisement of our communities, which means they cannot vote. and they cannot have the one power that we need to hold people accountable, which is to put people in power in office to legislate and advocate for the same communities that we elect them to do. So it's a well-crafted plan that has worked in this country for hundreds of years. But what gives me hope is that we're in a point where we have now said enough is enough. And we have realized, a lot more people have realized that these tales of saying that our Black and brown kids are getting over-policed, that they are dying. The truth is that the only reason there's proof is because we have these. If it wasn't for these phones, we wouldn't be able to prove to white America that this is what's happening. Every time you hear these stories, they're like, that's a lie.
But Naomi, like, even when we prove it, like, what do we really get for that? We're watching our people die on video. Like, PSP&Y just co-sponsored Eric Garner's 6-year memorial. We still have no justice for him. He has a 6-year-old daughter that was born a couple of months before he died, named Legacy. You know, it's very hard when, as Black people, we have to hope that when the police kill us, that they'll get fired. Like, we don't even go, right, Taj? We don't even go to, like, he should be in prison. Like, we're just hoping that they get fired.
Yeah, we can't even get an indictment. We can't even get a jury of peers to say, hey, that was wrong what you did. We can't get the bare minimum or modicum of justice. So when we, in these cries to defund the police, there's also a demand to, like, cut the bullshit and stop pretending that these systems were made to serve, protect, and support us in the first place. Because the reality is that the policing we see now is in line with the policing that has always occurred on Black and brown bodies in this country. And that's going back to the transatlantic slave trade. That's going back to slave patrol. That's going back to, you're not a full human being, and I'm going to make sure that you're very clear on that, which also correlates to the lack of funding and resources, right? Because if I don't fund your school, you'll never be able to pick yourself up by these imaginary bootstraps that people keep telling us to pull on. Some of our folks don't even have boots. So
I just watched this documentary about 3 kids that were applying to college. And Meryl, like, this talks to you. Like, I cried because these kids didn't have the means. They were like us. They was just regular people. Like, we're just regular people. That's how we consider ourselves. Like, just trying to get through. I feel like Black and brown people, we're always in a crisis. We're always in a state of trauma. We're always trying to make sure that our kid has a book or has a uniform or has, money to eat. Like, this is our lives, so that we have money for rent. So back to the documentary, these 3 kids, these poor kids had different type of problems applying for college. And then, they make it extra hard.
If we understand and we're in basic agreement that the system, that the empire has always been about these things, what will justice look like?
I want to make the call for action. I want to make the call for people to be angry. So, like, it's not enough that you watch this. I want you to watch this, and I want you to come to the protest that we're planning tomorrow. I want you to sign the petition and sign it and share it to other people. Like, we do all these tokenizations of having these voices, but and we're speaking some really important truths, but I'm so tired and angry of people saying, oh, I value your work, but then when we come to a protest, the turnout is not what we expected. So it's just, I'm so angry because you need to first call your legislators. Like, there are a million things that I can throw at to the crowd, like sign this petition, call this person, lobby for this bill. And there's so many ways in which we're trying to improve the world in really small ways. Like, with Tanesha, with her Eric Garner person, like, we all know that it won't put an end to the bigger problems, which is institutionalized racism. But it will help in small ways, and every small thing makes a difference. So we pushed so hard for defunding the NYPD because that was a small problem. Small in the bigger picture, it was really small. And although that didn't pan out, we still made our voices heard, and that opened the door for bigger advocacy. So, what I really need from everyone hearing this, I want you guys to support us. I want you guys to say, hey, I'm going to come to your protest. I'm going to come and I'm going to share this petition. I just feel so much anger, really at the world for not hearing us out.
Justice for me looks like equity. Justice for me as a Black woman who has sat and cried too many nights over too many things to get into looks like reparations. Justice for me looks like the system being really torn down and built back up by the people. Justice for me looks like elected officials that actually work for the people. Justice for me looks like communities that take care of themselves. Like, we keep us safe. Because of this pandemic, I started this organization. In April. We have done so much. We have bought laptops for students. We have signed on and endorsed events that we never thought that we would be a part of. We are now at PSPNY part of a national coalition, alliance, Journey for Justice. And we just wrote a letter to Trump telling him what we want, not what we want, what we demand before any of our kids, our teachers go back to school. Justice for me looks like teachers, parents, and students together, unified. Justice for me looks like I'm going to stay in these streets until things really change. Justice does not look like you painting Black Lives Matter on the road. Taj?
The interesting thing about justice for me is that we've always had to create it within our microcosms because it has never been an option for us. So what Meryl is saying about being tokenized as a young person, it really hits home. What Tanesha is saying about literally creating her own space because there was no space that she could go and be affirmed and valued and be heard, right? Justice for me really looks like accountability, and even these so-called friends that we have as a part of these structures, now is the time to really put on their big boy and girl pants and get bold with the vision. Because what we're hearing is sound bites right now from elected officials, from leadership at the Department of Education, from all these different spaces that should have our backs as citizens, as students, as parents. And they're saying what they think we want to hear, but we know after that budget vote that they don't mean that shit. Because if y'all was standing with the people, you would have defunded the police. If y'all was standing with the people, you wouldn't have allowed the mayor to cut healthcare and education during a global pandemic. And you wouldn't be rushing us into these death traps that you know you've been underfunding for decades. It shouldn't have taken a global pandemic for y'all to realize that all of these sinks are broken. All of these toilets in the schools are broken. We don't have soap. Our babies don't have paper towels. And now your expectation of parents and students and teachers is that we're just supposed to trust that all of a sudden, after a $461 million budget cut to public schools, that you just magically have all the resources you need to execute a safe reopening. We don't fucking buy it. I'm not sending my kids to school, and I have encouraged all my friends not to send their children and to do remote learning. And then the interesting thing about that is that even in this conversation, as we experience this racial justice awakening and reckoning, is there's new forms of inequality now, right? There are privileged parents talking about forming their own pods. We're going to get together. We can throw a couple of $1,000 together real quick and we're just going to pay a teacher to teach our kids. But y'all care so much. Y'all care so much and you want to be a part of solutions, right? That involves investment and really doing your own work, because the other really difficult part of this work for us as women of color and as students and youth of color, really what Meryl said about, oh my God, your voice is so, wow, that was so moving, that's so important. But then you don't come to the function. You don't support the workshop. You don't show up to the training that's advertised. You won't provide monetary support, right? Because at the end of the day, in a capitalist structure, what we need from you most is your tangible support. Because Tanesha can't buy those laptops for those kids in Eric Garner's memory without money, right? Naomi can't have CEC1 host workshops on how the ACS is targeting Black women during a pandemic over remote learning without funding, right? Meryl can't do her work and shouldn't have to pay to run all over the city to do the job that our elected officials get paid to do, right? And if she's choosing to do that work, then the support that she needs looks very much like vocal public support and also funding these grassroots operations, fundraising for your CEC, showing up in communal spaces and giving vocal support to the people that you know are the dissenting voices that are under attack. Because that's the reality. The people saying defund the NYPD, they're under attack. And the message being sent by some of these elected leaders, Lori Cumble, let me call you out. Hey, girl.
Lori, yeah.
She's talking about how there are no Black people in this movement. And if we want to be involved, we need to join our school board. Honey, I'm on 2 separate PTAs. I run my own organization, and I'm the program manager for a nationally recognized youth organization. So there's also a disconnect that is so obvious. And so
they don't see our hard work. They don't know how hard we work for free.
They
for
don't
nothing.
for free. For
Naomi, what justice look like for you?
For me, justice looks like not having to stay up late at night worrying if my brown son is going to come home alive. Not having to worry and advocate for the countless amount of children that we have across the city, not just in my school district, who are living in countless crises. Not worrying about if our students with disabilities are getting the services that they need. I think sort of the atrocity of this whole thing, and I said this from the very beginning, this pandemic was not just going to show the inequities that exist in the city, it was going to put a huge Batman spotlight on it. And I think what's been the frustrating part about this is that, yes, we do have, at least in my district, we do have some great legislators who have stepped up and are busting their butts, opening up their district office, giving out food, giving out PPE, connecting families with the services that they need. But yet across the city, we do have some elected officials who are so terrified of the uprising, that is the Black and brown families actually. And if this is, as we all know, this comes in cycles, right? Because this is not the first time Black and brown communities of color rise up. I mean, from the 60s, we had the Black Panthers, we had the Young Lords. They were building a coalition of, a People's Rainbow, a coalition. The Rainbow Coalition, to connect people who are disenfranchised, regardless of your skin color, to come together. But that is exactly what people in power do not want. And unfortunately, often those people are not just white people. They are our own people that look like us, because they do not want to lose the little bit of power that they perceive that belongs to them. There are some elected officials that have gone on rants about, that gentrifying communities are taking the message and weaponizing it. Listen, at the end of the day, we have to be strategic about this, right? This is our movement. This is what we need. To run with us, listen, I'll give you the baton and you run with us. But with the caveat, you need to let people of color lead.
I'm okay with having different organizations like DSA join the resistance and the fight for social change, where I think it's important that we do differentiate the roles, is letting the fight have in front the face of and the voices of people of color, because I think that's what's key here. We can't let any other groups or entities take over the message and co-opt it and become their own, because as we know, then it becomes political platforms for people who want to run for office. So I think that's what's very key and important, to make sure that if this is going to be, and I firmly do believe this is going to be down in the history books of social change. And what I've been telling people all along is, at the end of the day, when the books are written, where you stand today on issues is what your children and your grandchildren are going to judge you on.
I agree. And I don't even think that we should, I think that we have a way of saying things that we've been trained to say things, and we have to really retrain ourselves to think a different way, because I feel like we shouldn't ask them to let us do anything. I didn't ask anybody to let me start PSPNY. I said, this is what I'm going to do. You understand what I'm saying? Like, we have to start taking that mentality. Like, this is my space. This is, I deserve to be in this space, and no one has to let me do anything, because this is my human right. It's my human right to have good housing. It's my human right to have good education for my kids. It's my human right to not be programmed with lies your whole life. You know, I'm a foster child. So I just, you know, the reason why I'm in this fight the biggest reason is because I still walk around with that hurt child. And I know that you carry your childhood with you when you grow into adult. Your childhood doesn't go away. And it molds you into the person that you are. And the society, you know, has us as a people being somebody that we're not.
You all, you know, inspirationally talked about what justice looks like. And Tanesha, you just gave the perfect segue of talking about some of the ways in how you build it. Not waiting, but how we build it. So let's talk about this particular political moment, this moment of crisis and opportunity, this moment of, you know, doom in some ways, and this moment of building for ourselves. How do we build it? How do we get there?
Really wanted to piggyback on Tanesha, because something really powerful that stuck out to me just now is her assertion that we don't need permission, because in this moment of reckoning where newer people are jumping into the fold, what I'm experiencing is that the loudest and most unapologetic Black folks specifically are being silenced and tone policed and being told, yes, we agree with your values, but not like that. And I think that that's something in these spaces where we say we're doing the work and we're committed and we care about Black folks and people of color, and we want to center them, right? We want to center women, we want to center children, we want to center low-income folks and disabled folks and queer folks. What that looks like is giving the space to that unapologetic framing, to that righteous rage, to be expressed without vitriol, without judgment. Because when you look at the history, how can you not be enraged? So I just wanted to surface that and thank Tanesha for bringing that up, because what I'm seeing a lot in these movement spaces that say they're intersectional is the silencing of the most impacted individuals. And that completely undermines the work. Meryl, go ahead.
Like, I want to say, yeah, I think I've actually experienced that a lot as well. And I've had this instance where I felt really angry at these state legislators for not jumping on this bill to tax the rich. And, you know, some older people, they were saying, oh, there's just one vote. It's not that serious. And I just don't understand, because my entire school funding is on the line here. We're not going to be able to get electives. Like, there's just so much on the line. And I think after every single time I meet state legislators, like, I just get more and more angry. And that anger is just something that I bring with me. So I ask people on the spot, I'm like, oh, are you going to do this? Like, are you going to support us? Instead of just, like, taking their taking their receptiveness, because receptiveness is not actually, yes, receptiveness is not support at all. Like everyone says, oh, we want to hear black voices, and when black voices actually speak up, sometimes, you know, they are happy, but a lot more times they are silenced.
My thing is, I see this through a political lens, right? And the way the structure is built is those who have the most power are often the ones who are in office. And the way they remain in office is because our communities are so used to the system not working for them that they don't want to get involved in politics. People tell me all the time, I don't do politics. And then my answer is, then you must not do life. Because where you live is political. If you have a supermarket, is political. How your train works is political. The school you go to is political. There is nothing in life that is not touched by an aspect of politics. And the only way we're going to swing the pendulum is we need to start explaining to our communities of color that the only way you make institutional dents in this very thick wall that is white supremacy is you need to bring those people at those same very tables that are they're legislating those laws. And until our people start to see that those changes create domino changes, is the only way we're going to start really seeing attainable changes. The truth is that the browning of America is real. There are people who are white who are absolutely terrified that things are changing. And that is why you're seeing this rhetoric. You're seeing a law being legislated right now in federal government to stop funding of the 1619 curriculum, which is like crazy to me. But this is how scared people are. They're terrified that their once upheld version of events that was history is going to be completely replaced to what the truth is. And the truth is what wakes people up and goes, wait a minute, I have power.
I think that time has already came. Like, people have already been woken up. Like, we know that this country basically taught us lies to uphold whiteness, to uphold white supremacy. And I have another saying, as far as going and having a seat at their table, I don't want to sit at their table. We're going to bring our own. We have our own table. We don't want to sit at their table. Out of the history of the government, only 3% been people of color, and it's never worked for people of color. So they arguing over the Confederate statues. They don't want to take the Confederate statues down. So what's really changed? What technology? What's really changed from Emmett Till to George Floyd to Eric Gardner to Sandra Bland to the young kids that I just seen in May, where they had these 12-year-old black and brown kids on their knees, the police, in the dirt during a pandemic, where our kids can't get access to technology and our kids can't get access to Wi-Fi. And a white ally to me is somebody that's going to put their money where their mouth is. Donate, like Taj said, donate to our grassroots organizations that are out here on the ground. I'm sorry, that's my grandson. That are out here on the ground every day, that are fighting the legislators, that are lobbying, that are, fighting for $4 billion that was supposed to be ours, our kids' education funds 10 years ago. We've been here, but what do people that say they want to help people do? They give their money to charities, and that money don't get to us on the ground. Help us on the ground, help our communities.
Before we're joined by a young teacher, I just wanted to say that, we have here officially parents, students, community, school district leaders, people who are intricately involved, but not usually recognized as educators. But for anyone interested in actually liberation, there's no question that you all are the true educators, and it's just extraordinary to get some of that education from you. That said, we have a classroom teacher here who's also been part of the liberation movement and process. Welcome, Drew Drake.
What's good, everybody? My name is Drew Drake. I am a teaching artist. I teach out at MS50 as well as New Ventures High School in Staten Island, teaching creative writing and ELA and theater. And so, yeah, I'm just excited to be here and be in conversation with you all. And yeah.
Oh, Drew, thank you for being here with us. You're amazing. And Drew is also a poet. He writes amazing poetry. So whenever we have an action, Drew drops a poem for us, and he never disappoints. So we want to know, like, how do you feel being a young Black teacher, male, in this environment right now?
It's a lot. I mean, I think at times in my experience here in New York, like in the schools, I feel like I stand out. You know, I definitely feel like almost a unicorn in a way. Of a lot of students haven't had experience with a Black male educator. And so that's always a hurdle that we have to kind of step over, as well too, that I'm also, as much as I'm teach ELA and theater and writing, I'm also always making sure that we have space in our classroom to talk about what is actually happening. So this semester during, COVID-19, my classroom kind of shifted into one, allowing us to be in conversation about all the things that are affecting us. Right. During that semester we had, of course, COVID, we're here in quarantine, and how that's affecting Black and brown communities more, in a very higher rate. But also we have, we had protests that were coming on. Especially in New York City, we had this lockdown curfew that was happening, right? And allowing the classroom to be a space where we can actively talk about these things, and make sure that it's not something that we sweep under the rug. That I've had a lot of co-workers who were like, "Oh, I'm not going to have these conversations because my students they don't know how to. They're not affected by it." But that's not true. Right? Like students, we are definitely affected by what's going on, and students have voices, right? The students in their minds, they're being impacted by things too. So for me, it was making sure that I made sure that my classroom was a space that, of course, I want to make sure I'm teaching you ELA standards, right? I got that. We definitely going to do that. But at the same time, making sure that it's also a safe space where we can talk about actively what is happening and affecting us right in front of us. So yeah, it was a very interesting moment. And sometimes it feels kind of alone when you have those kind of conversations, because a lot of teachers don't want to take that on. But I feel like, especially teachers of color, like we're doing it because we have no choice. You know what I mean? Like, of course, like I'm not going to steer away from what's happening outside, because it's happening to me and I know it's affecting you too. So yeah, that's kind of how I've been feeling this past semester, or past semesters, I guess.
So Drew, where are you from originally?
I'm a military kid, so I moved around a lot, but I'm from the South. My family's in Huntsville, Alabama. And so I have been up here in New York for the past 3.5 years. And then before that, I came from University of Tennessee, and then by way of Huntsville, Alabama, where my family's at.
How does it feel to be a teacher and an activist?
I mean, for me, it doesn't feel like it's a separate thing, right? Because I feel like I definitely let me take a step back. I think it doesn't feel like a separate thing because I knew what made me want to become a teacher is because I felt like in my education that I've had as a young student, like I had teachers who weren't available to have these types of conversations. And I knew there was a need to have these conversations, especially as educators, right? Like, I mean, that's what, as an educator, I definitely want to show up as. So I guess to answer that question, it does not feel like there's a separation. It just feels like another just thing that we're doing in class, right? But it's a needed thing. And because I think, especially growing up for me, one, not having educators of color, not having teachers of color, I can, maybe count on one hand how many teachers of color I had from grade school up until college. I went to HBCU, so that once I got to HBCU, that changed. But from grade school up into high school, like I can count on my hands how many teachers of color I had, and then with that, I can count on my hands of how many times teachers were able to have conversations with me that were very authentic conversations about the injustices that were in the education system, right? The lack of things that we're talking about. Whose voices are we hearing in the education system predominantly, right? Whose stories are being told, whose stories are being silenced, right? So those were all things that made me want to become an educator, because I was like, oh, this has to happen. And who better than myself of being experiencing the lack of it than to be like, nah, it needs to be changed. So, yeah.
I think it's worth saying from my own experiences with the New York City Alternative High Schools, which is really the largest experiment within the U.S., within U.S. history, within the history of the empire, of a publicly funded, progressive or radical community-based educational experiment. From those experiences, there are two basic truisms. All true organizers are educators, naturally. And all true educators are students, naturally, if we're doing it right.
Mm-hmm.
So having some great examples of educational leaders here, all of you, there was this strange bubble that you've all talked about in this last period of using this technology to be safe. And that safety is being ripped away with this push to go back to in-person school on one level or another. And obviously, in some parts of the country, this is a direct, as I think Taj said, death march. In New York, people are going to say, I think, oh, your numbers are looking great now. Your numbers are looking good. What's the problem? So in addition to hearing a little bit more from all of you about what the problem is, let's hear you talk about what the resistance is. What are the plans for the fall? What are the plans for the upcoming resistance in all forms?
So I know, so just this kind of coincides with the point we were making earlier about supporting the folks who have been doing this work and supporting the folks on the front lines, because what we keep noticing is that leadership keeps telling us they don't have any information, they don't have a plan because they can't plan, and that they're flying the plane while they build it. But we know, as organizers, educators, and parents who are invested in communities and not just our own children, that the Alliance for Quality Education has laid out a roadmap for a safe and equitable reopening, that the Moore Caucus of the UFT, who does a lot of the important work that the UFT refuses to do around anti-racism work in our schools, has also laid out a plan and some demands. And then we're also seeing newer, inexperienced, but really well-intentioned parent groups spring up in direct response to this effort to reopen schools that we know will not be safe. And something so crazy today, I saw one of the schools in my district had posted recommendations from the CDC, kind of nudging folks in the direction of, hey, you know what, everything's fine. And I couldn't help but think that that directly correlated with the jackass in chief basically threatening our public schools with additional budget cuts if they don't open. And I really think it's important to acknowledge the kind of ridiculous state you have to be in as a society, where the president of the country would rather open up schools so that he can boost the economy than make sure that these historically underfunded public schools have the ventilation and the air conditioning and the space and the resources that they need to reopen fully. And I really think that organizations like the Coalition for Educational Justice and the Alliance for Quality Education and Moore Caucus and Parent PAC, it doesn't make sense not to make them a part of the conversation when they've been talking about all the inequities that COVID exacerbated for years at this point. We can't have a reopening conversation without talking to those folks and the communities they serve.
I actually, so I have 4 kids in 3 different school communities. And yesterday I was on a call with one of the principals at one of the school communities. And he flat out said, like, I've been a principal for a number of decades. And this is the first time that I have no idea what September is going to bring. And that's incredibly scary, not for a parent, right, to hear that, but for people who are entrusted to lead, that are entrusted for the school community with your children, with the staff, to say that. One of the examples that he gave was they have an HVAC system that doesn't work, but yet school construction authority is claiming they did an inspection. They said, we can repair aspects of this and it'll be fine. But we have how many $1 billion cut to our education budget? So how we're going to, I feel what frustrates me is, like, I feel we're leading people on. And I am not in the business of telling people we're going back to school when we know damn well we're not. And you're setting people up for failure. You're setting up, either way, not everyone's going to be happy, and that's fine. But let's address what's going on head on and be honest about it. Let's be honest you have no money. Let's be honest that you're waiting on a federal stimulus package to give you money for PPE because you don't have any. And that's not going to come. Yeah. So that's what's frustrating me here, that we're not being honest with the very people that.
But that's the crazy thing, Naomi. Like, we live in the only city that has a billionaires row. We have 114 billionaires that live in the state of New York, worth over $550 billion. And they have made $50 billion since this pandemic. Why is our state government and our local government not taxing these rich billionaires? We have Wall Street here. New York is never and has never been broke. Yeah. That, they're saying we don't have the money, we counter with, but you got $10 billion for the cops. But we have a billionaire's row. But, they pay less taxes than we do. You know what I'm saying?
Taxes on yachts.
Yes. You know what I'm saying? We have the money. They just are basically telling us that they do not care about our communities. Look at how this whole pandemic thing went down. It did not have to go down like this. People did not have to die the way they did. If leadership, Cuomo and de Blasio, was doing their jobs in January, we knew this was coming. We always watching the news, and the medical experts were saying that if it comes here, we're not prepared. What was Cuomo doing? He couldn't buy PPE? And what is ventilators? 80% of people that was on ventilators died. So what did they really do? What killed us? Meryl?
Racism killed us. It's just, I'm so angry because we elect these people and we think that they're going to represent us. And they continuously gaslight us, telling us, oh, we want to do the best for you. And they wrap their hate in a bag and they call it a gift. That's what they do it.
It's like, what's the difference between a Republican and a Democrat if you're both hurting my communities? If you're both taking money from education, what are you doing for me? No, you're not doing. You get paid 6 figures. Yeah. To harm our communities, to harm our children, and we're tired, and we're not going to stop being in these streets and in your faces until we change things. And we're going to start deciding who we want to be in office. We're going to start picking our political elected officials starting now.
And I think also it's just like this, just a yes and to everybody. This is like the time where like capitalism is just like at its finest right now, right? The conversation of you want to choose between you want to make money and have money to pay the rent, or do you want to be healthy? Anytime these two are your options, that's just dangerous, right? And that's not caring about people's lives at all. Because who are these people that's infected? That's closely affected to that. That's going to be Black and brown communities the most, right? Of like people who are going to put their lives on the line for something of just to be able to make ends meet. And that's like what, like, Meryl, you hit on the head of you just gift wrapping hate and then calling it a gift, right? Like it's the worst. And then also the taxing of like, all right, so even with this idea of reopening schools, right? That's another thing that you're going to put on a teacher to already manage in a classroom. Like, you want a teacher to manage PPE. You want a teacher to manage social distancing in a classroom where they're already overworked and they're already underpaid. And it's just another layer that you're putting on somebody that's already falling at the knees, like barely holding things up, right? And so and then it's like, what happens if you get sick? What happens if you get sick? Are you going to have the sick days? Like, is that going to be, a thing that's going to be allotted to you? And then this whole struggle, if you get sick, now you have students now who also, a student can come in the room and you don't know where the student, the student's family, you don't know why the student's been. So there's so many like big red flags and questions that people are trying to dance around by trying to be like, well, you'll get money. We got the money. We'll figure it out. And it's like, no, it's not a thing where people are going to be okay. That's not a situation that I want to put myself in, or I think anybody should put themselves in. So
it's all connected. Like, we're all working on this together, and people try to divide us. Like, just like a couple hours ago, a state assembly person, he was like, oh, I think it would be really concerning to work on integration of schools since so many people are working, since right now the big issue is reopening. And I was telling him, I was working on reopening as well. Like, I am an advocate for that, and I am telling you to do integration. And so we have all these different movements, but they're all in the same strand. We want education to be equitable, and we want racial justice.
Yeah.
100%, Meryl. I think the thing people are starting to realize, but haven't realized fully, is that racial justice is educational justice, because a framework in which you acknowledge the existence of structural inequity develops your praxis in a way where you can see problematic structures and you work to eradicate them. Like, just even and Meryl got so upset, and I felt it so much because we immediately recognized that as a cop-out. Like, I'm not going to address segregation in our schools and the inherently racist effects of that segregation because of school reopening. But guess what? School reopening is also going to have segregated and disproportionate effects and realities rooted in racism, because y'all have yet to address the pre-existing conditions for the disproportionality that exists in the first place. So thank you, Meryl.
That's why PSP and Y is so happy to be a part of Journey for Justice Alliance Coalition. We are down here with grassroots organizations from Arkansas, from New Orleans, from Milwaukee, from Albuquerque, New Mexico, from Puerto Rico. It's like 78 grassroots organizations that came together nationally to write a letter to Trump and tell him that we're not going back to school if we don't have ample testing with rapid results. We're not going back to school if our schools are not overfunded, if we don't have more than enough money. We're not going back to school if the police are in them. We're not going back to your normal. That's what the politically correct to me is just another word for oppression. Because what did it do? Oh, you can get your point across, but you have to be politically correct. No, I have to say the truth. That's what I have to do. Because that politically correct have never gotten my people anywhere. Asking and begging and kneeling and pleading for 400 and something years have never got my people anywhere. So we're not doing that anymore. We're coming for everything that's ours, that we've been worked for. There's no bootstraps. We built the bootstraps.
Since we all know that remote learning wasn't successful for many reasons, right? It was brought on literally within a week and a half. Parents had no idea what they were doing. Kids had no idea what they were doing. School communities had no idea what they were doing. Central had no idea what they were doing. And I think not addressing what went wrong and how to make it better, because obviously we're going to have to go through that direction again. But I personally feel that that is all intentional. It's intentional not to have these conversations with people and with the parents, because now parents are going to be put in a position where they're going to have to teach their kids to a certain degree, right? Oversee them or help them. And there's a wide range of abilities. There are, people who get it, understand it, can do it. And there are people who are in between, and there are people who just can't. Remote learning is not for everyone. That is why buildings exist, right? That's why classrooms exist. But I think the fact that we're not addressing this early on is literally setting up more children to fail, more families to fail. And one of the things that we've been super passionate about is addressing the weaponized use of ACS on families. And that is the way, if you don't have broadband in your home, which a lot of people don't, that's going to work against you. Because if you are sharing a phone with 5 other people, your child may get on for an hour at a random time. And teachers, right, bless you, you have metrics that you need to account to your own principal. And the principal has to submit this to the district. And the district has to submit it to, it's a domino effect. But it's all intentional, because when these agencies are used to monitor activity, then it's used to keep people in line. I can't tell you how many people, when we've done certain workshops, has told us that they made a complaint about their child not receiving services, and within a month they got a call about education neglect. Because they either, had questions about it, or they questioned too much, or they thought they needed something different. And then once you have an educational neglect case, it stays on forever, and it's a never-ending cycle. So I think this is all intentional, and it's one of the many multifaceted uses and weaponizing that happens across, not just New York City, but across the country, to keep people in line. Because one of the first things I was hearing is, I had a parent tell me, not from my district, but somewhere in the city, who said, I'm an essential worker. My child couldn't get on at 11 o'clock for a class. And the teacher said, well, I'm going to have to call ACS. That's not helpful.
Outrageous. And you know exactly who they're calling ACS on and who they're
Exactly.
not. You know who exactly gets the opportunity to hand an assignment late or not show up for class and get the polite phone call, and who immediately has the authorities weaponized against them, which I find particularly egregious in the age of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, that we would continue to weaponize systems and institutions that do not understand communities and do not lead with care and love against folks.
Where do we go from here?
Don't go backwards, that's for damn sure. After the black boxes on your Instagrams and after the Black Lives Matter signs, we cannot start collecting our checks again, go back to work and the beach and the bar, and continue business as usual. If I can leave folks with anything, it's really that. Because the inequity that so many people seem to have just realized exists, some of us have been in this fight for years. Some of our folks in this work, they died without seeing their dreams realized around an equitable system that works for every family in New York City. So we really just, I can only speak for myself, but I would ask that you support individuals like Drew, like Tanesha, like Naomi, like Meryl and myself, by not only putting your bodies in the spaces where we need support and raising your voices and lending your dollars, but also making sure that the spaces you're in, even if we aren't there, are not ripe for us to be attacked when we do decide to share and talk about these things. Because what happens a lot is people will say in a private message or a one-on-one conversation, I really support this thing, but then you get into a room with those same teachers or legislators or parents, and now it's a problem and no one wants to speak up and no one wants to address segregation or inequity or the disproportionate impacts of COVID, which we're going to be living with for years. So what we really need is folks to take this new information and apply it to their interpersonal relationships and their day-to-day interactions, not just to go to a protest or sign a petition. This is everyday, all-day, lifetime work, and we really want folks to stay committed and stay vocal.
Yeah.
I think it's important that people start checking themselves and their unconscious or conscious bias, however you want to frame this. Because there's a lot of people who love to sport a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, but when they're in their white spaces, they will co-sign the most egregious and offensive things that their family members are saying, that their neighbors are saying. And it takes, I mean, I don't think it takes courage because we have no choice but to stand up against it. But I think people need to stop being as scared and accept their convictions and say it. And if that means that you are no longer friends with your racist aunt, with your racist neighbor, or with that friend that claims was about you but really wasn't, then so be it. Because the days of accepting people's mentality are no longer. You know, in the words of Representative Lewis, we need trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble to pivot this work forward. And as we're not causing any trouble, we're allowing the system to stay as is, and as is not working for people of color. And if we continue to do this, we're going to be in the same fight. We're going to be saying how this is not going to work and this is unjust and it's unfair. But the only way we're going to change it is not just saying it's unjust and unfair, is literally being about it all the time, nonstop, until people go, okay, enough. What do you want me to do? Where do I donate? Because you have to, this is not something we can opt out of. It's not. For us, this is the way it's going to be. And these people are either about it or they're not about it. If they're not about it, they can move over to the side while people who are about it do the work.
Yes. Yes and this. Like, I mean, I think you hit on the head about checking your intentions, right? Because people can be like, yo, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to support it right now because it's trendy. Or I can support it right now because it's like everybody's on this bandwagon, but they're not doing the internal work to let go of these biasness that they're holding on to. And also to know that it's a long game. Like, there's so many things that we are unrooting and need to pull apart, even especially in the education system, but just as a whole, right? And so I think about, like, there's this one time in this semester that just passed, this current semester, when I forgot. I mean, and it's so sad, like the Black death and just here in America, it's just like a never ending paragraph. It just keeps going, right? And I forgot who it was, but I was in a week where I was like just in so much frustration, exhaustion. And I remember I remember having a meeting with some other teachers in the schools, and I was like, hey, are we going to talk about just what is going on, like, as a whole right now? And I had some white teachers who were like, nah, like I don't know how to have that conversation, or I don't think I can have that conversation. And I'm just like, just talk, just begin, just start from a place of honesty and transparency, and I promise you the rest will come. I promise you, if you start the seed, everybody else in that classroom will feel comfortable to do the same thing, right? And so it came from a place of like, yo, like I have to make sure that this space is a space that we are talking about all the things that are affecting us as people, as students, as educators. We can't hold back and shy away from things, right? And as we began to have these conversations, people were talking about police brutality and their understanding, like their lack of understanding around it. And I was like, well, we got to look at even in our education system, like there's so much policing in our education system, and who is getting the brunt of that? Black and brown students, right? And so where does that cycle go towards? That cycle goes towards, we see that with Black death around us all the time, Black and brown death. And so like allowing us to take time to acknowledge and make sure that we're making space for these conversations of transparency to start with ourselves as educators, and leading that for the students to follow. So that's my only 2 cents. I will go in there.
Black people, we don't need white saviors. We've never needed anybody to save us. We have been saving ourselves for over 400 years, and we have been coming through the most brutal and most inhumane thing that any people on this planet has ever dealt with. And we're tired. We're tired of our people dying in the street. We're tired of our children not getting what they deserve, not getting the education that they deserve, not learning about themselves, not seeing themselves in the curriculum. We're tired of the whitewashing. We're tired of you telling us you don't have the money to educate our kids. And without us, there wouldn't be an economy. We're tired, and we're going to change things. Period.
Doors are fastened and the windows clear. Hands on that dial. Done lost her track. Can't love straight, keep a looking back. Keep your hand on that dial.
Hi, my name is Wendy Marshall. On the broadcast committee of the People Strike, and I'm here with Leah Wood and Makeba Walls Robinson, both paraprofessionals, members of We Caucus and of Parapower in the Philadelphia School District. And we're going to talk today about refusing to return, issues facing Black women in public schools. First I'd like for Leah first and then Makeba to introduce themselves. Leah?
Hi, my name is Leah Wood. I am a classroom assistant at Beltonville School of Arts and Sciences. I've been in the school district for 13 years, and I am the executive director of Parapower.
Hello, I'm Makeba Walls Robinson. I currently work at West Philadelphia High School. I've been with the district for 21 years. And I'm a member of the Parapower as well. I'm one of the organizers.
Thank you. Welcome. We're so honored to have you here with us today. Many paras are Black and brown. The majority of paras are Black and brown. And many are older women and younger women with underlying health issues. It's a stark choice between refusing to return because it's not safe, because it's the risk is up to death, or losing your job if you refuse to go back. So the stakes are pretty high in all the organizing. Leah, do you have any thoughts about that? About what the stakes are in terms of returning?
Yeah, it's pretty high, and I really don't have any underlying conditions. My asthma is very minimal, but I am a carrier, and I know this. But I also have a son. He's 23 who lives with me, and he's immune compromised. 2 years ago, we didn't know what was wrong with him, and I have this intense fear of bringing something home, and his immune system can't handle it. And I know there are a lot of parents and paras that have that same fear that what are we bringing home? We already bring home the asbestos and the lead and the mold, and then you want to add on top of that COVID. It's terrifying, and I don't think the administration is listening, and I don't think they care to listen. And I'm not talking about principals. I'm talking about 440.
440 is the school district in Philadelphia.
Yes.
Makeba, you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I have an underlying health issue. I'm very concerned about it. And I know a lot of parents and teachers that are taking care of their elderly parents, taking care of sickly children. So, and it's just a high risk. And I don't think it's, and like Leah was saying, The school district knows because we always have issues in our schools that was never addressed, and there's none reason that we're so against going back to school. But that's just an added risk that we're facing.
Yeah. I want to ask about the kind of conditions and the concerns of educators before the pandemic hit. But before we do that, I want you to say a little bit about the context in Philly. So if you could explain We Caucus and what that's about, Parapower and what that's about, I think that would help our viewers. Leah, do you want to go?
Sure. So the We Caucus is basically the Working Educators Caucus, and it is, I call it the social justice wing of the PFT. So there's a collective bargaining, which is kind of more like businessy, and then the Working Educators Caucus, which is more social justice bound and democratic. Now, Parapower, what we are is we are a group of parents that just got together during election season, and we're fighting to be treated as professionals, because a lot of times people do not see parents as professionals. They see us as second-class citizens, babysitters, copy papers. It does not matter, and we want to be recognized as actual educators is what we do.
And in fact, you could argue that it's paras that keep the whole school system together, right?
Yes, we are that linchpin.
Yeah, we definitely do. Even with our little income, we're the ones that's helping out in the classroom financially, whether it's buying rewards or feeding students. That's what we do.
Yeah. So the school system couldn't run without you, but you're the lowest paid educators in the system. So that's part of what We Caucus is fighting to win power of the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers, that you guys are part of that. I'm also, by the way, a We community member. What would it take to make the school district really responsive to educators like you, to parents, and to students? What needs to change?
Money. It's all about money. And the people actually have to put pressure on the school district. We can't do it by ourselves. We need our families to say, no, we're not going to take this. We know that they're busy. We know that they're struggling themselves, and they want more for their children. But they need to help us put pressure on the district to stop yanking money out of the schools. Stop charter schools. I'm not a fan of charter schools. I know that a lot of times it seemed like they were necessary, but it yanks so much money and resources out of schools, and we need our parents to demand that our neighborhood schools are fully funded the way that it used to be. I mean, they weren't great funded, but I remember as a kid going on school trips, having a library, having noontime aides, NTAs. I remember books. I remember those things, and our students, our babies don't have them this now, and it's not fair.
What are the issues particularly for black women educators in the Philadelphia school system?
I was really surprised because at West, I thought it was just there as far as the racial injustice. But after hearing the testimonies last night on students, educators, I had no idea it was school-wide. The racism, as far as not having enough black teachers and whatnot. But even though West, we have a black principal, but the roles of leadership don't go to the few black people, educators we have in our school. It goes to the young white educators that just graduate from school. Like, it's never offered to those. In fact, we out of 15 teachers that aren't coming back this school year, only 2 of them were white. The rest of them were black. So we going to have even less black educators.
What black women are facing today is like, they don't go out and recruit. They don't look at your parents, who are mostly black and brown women, who want to become teachers. They don't make a pathway for them. It's like, they don't even care. They don't go to HBCUs. They don't. It's a problem because our children need to see our faces, and one of the things I want to say is that not every educator needs to be a teacher. Like there needs to be enough parents that are Black and brown that stay as parents. I see myself
Me too.
retiring as a parent because
I love it.
I like being able to connect to a few kids here and there, that the ones that people miss or call them the hard ones, and being able to break a lesson down and seeing their eyes light up when they get it. It's amazing. And I think people need to understand that parents are educators. We do teach, and you need more of them, and you need to pay us like we're educators, not like we're children.
How does the school system ignore the needs of working class Black and brown kids in terms of the stuff that is taught? What is your perspective about that?
Oh, they need to throw all that stuff in the trash. I am so sick of consultants.
Yeah.
Oh, they don't teach life skills. None of our babies know how to do anything anymore. It's like we are 150 years behind. They
Yeah.
took out all of the interesting parts of school, art, music. They just started putting that back, and it's not even real, and it's not like pleasurable. And they just took it all away from them, and they trying to turn them into little robots, and it doesn't give them it. The education system does not give them a chance to dream. It doesn't give them a chance to explore. If you're not from a well-to-do family or a, like Penn Alexander or one of the more affluent public schools, you don't get those opportunities unless somebody really fights for it. Like, you have to really, really fight for it, and you have to know. But it's always reading, math, science, maybe social studies. They're teaching to a test that
Yes.
purposely made to make our children feel stupid. It is so it just annoys the little crap out of me. That is what they're doing. It does not give our children a chance to thrive. They are so smart and creative, and it just sucks it all out of them.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So glad to be here today with Victoria, who is a young student in Wake County, is a part of the Wake County Black Student Coalition. And I just want to say, first of all, thank you for being on here today to just share about some of the work that you're doing out in Wake County. And yeah, I would love for you to share a little about yourself and about some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm currently I guess you would say a rising senior, or I'm a senior, class of 2021 at Enloe High School in North Carolina. 17. I don't know what else is really relevant. I remember just seeing the world on fire after or at least America. Well, actually, yeah, I would say the world, because it wasn't just America. It was other countries, coming out and advocating and stuff and protesting after George Floyd's death. But I don't know. I felt kind of helpless in a certain sense, just because I remember growing up when I was in elementary school and seeing Trayvon Martin's death just be huge, and kind of I was too young to do anything. I remember seeing that, and then even with the previous, or the kind of deaths that happened after that, between Trayvon Martin and George Floyd's death, with even Tamir Rice or Alton Sterling, or these countless names and stuff, and even the names that we don't even know, the shootings and stuff that happened consistently that we don't hear about because they weren't recorded. I don't know, I felt really helpless, and I felt like I had to do something, because I've been protesting and stuff since I was sixth grade, whether it be for gun reform, or whether that be for environmental justice and that kind of stuff, and activism, and then talking about racial injustice with like the community and all that kind of stuff. So I've been like protesting for a while. I'm always out at, you know, the Women's March or wherever, just going out and doing stuff. And so I kind of hit me that I have so many high school friends who are at home and they want to, on Instagram, you know, they want to do something. They're posting and posting and posting, but no one's like getting out on the street and like calling out these politicians and calling out these like community leaders and stuff and like holding them accountable. If no one's gonna do it, then like I have to, you know, like we can't keep waiting and waiting for the next person to do it. It's like, no, if no one's gonna do it, then I have to step up and I have to like lead something. And so I remember, I think it was like a few nights after, because I'd been on May 30th was when they had the first kind of big Raleigh protest, at least. I don't know what it was in other places, but I remember May 30th, like I came out and it was like huge. And like, so ever since then I've been protesting every single day. I've been going out for about like maybe like a week or like 2 weeks since that first start date had happened. And I remember I called my friend Jakob and I was like, dude, like we have to do something for Wake County, because right now like nothing is happening. Students are at home, they want to do something, but like it's just there's no like push or drive. So I'm like, if we have to be that push for like action, like why not us? So we it's like planned and like got a logo done and like all this like other stuff, and we kind of just like, I don't know, it just kind of took off from there. And we first reached out to Reagan Razone and Jazz and Venus, and they're also students who go to Enloe High School. And we were just saying, like, you know, will you guys be down to help us? Because they had already made a petition for ending SROs in Wake County public schools. And so we were like, would you guys be down to join our team and like help us get this started? Because it's a huge division. So I'm one of those, like, you know, token students, if you will, where I had the opportunity to be put in the AP classes and on the honors classes and all that kind of stuff. And so, you know, I think a big push is with at Enloe, we have like one of the most active BSU programs across Wake County, but even then we barely get support from, I'll say, people in higher positions to help us and to really help with our program. And so I was thinking, you know, for us to be one of the most active BSUs in Wake County, I can't imagine the countless other schools who are silencing their Black students. And so not only Black, but just minority students in general. I will say the Black community, it's kind of hard because there are certain times when like the Black community, you know, we have such a huge struggle when it comes to racism. But then talking about, you know, even like Black queer lives, like most students are being silenced, or most people are being silenced by the Black community. Black queer people are being silenced. And like, even for me growing up, like I grew up in a Christian household and that was like not a big thing. And so it's hard because, you know, I had to like kind of relearn everything about, you know, if I'm going to be Black and talk about my struggle, I can't leave out people who are queer and like LGBT community and their struggle as well. And so it was hard having to relearn that and stuff. But I think it's like in some way or another, like all the struggles of these minority groups are like intertwined, you know? And so I just wanted to make a safe place where people can come and speak their mind about more specifically the Black struggle, but truly like the minority struggle. That was a lot. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you for that. That's really powerful because you're hitting on a few different points there, right? That this countywide Black student coalition is not just for Black students, but for students who see their struggles aligned with the Black struggle and with the struggle against racism, and the ways that interconnect with all of these other struggles as well. So it's really powerful that, right, from this moment of George Floyd, you were to connect with students who are already doing work on SROs. And so hearing about the work of SROs, what does that organizing work look like for the Wake County Black Student Coalition? And what are some of y'all demands as it relates to police-free schools?
Yeah. Well, when you're saying what does it look like, I'll tell you, it's a lot of crying, a lot of tears, a lot of like frustration. I can totally pull up our demands as well. I should have them. I don't want to like misspeak and get them wrong, so let me pull it up real quick. But I mean, honestly, like I think just truth being told, like it's a lot of work because, you know, we're a bunch of like young kids. We're high school students and stuff, and some of us like are some of this Grace people on my board, Gracie and Jasmine, they just graduated, but you know we're still high school students who are minority high school students, you know, going to a school where, you know, we're not really. It's hard because I love my high school. I think it's a great school and they try their hardest, but we can always do better. You know, we can always listen to students. We can always do so much more than what they're doing now. So it's like, while I don't want to shame my high school or, you know, Wake County in general, it's like we still have to hold people accountable for what you're doing, because there are so many issues that aren't being addressed, you know. But that's a whole other topic.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's definitely a lot. Sorry, I'm gonna pull it up as I'm looking for this. But it's definitely, it's a lot harder than people think. I think people think that, you know, we're just like teenagers who just like are like, hey, let's meet on this time, and like just show up. And it's like, it's so much calling and talking to the press and talking to, oh gosh, like adults who don't like us and say, you're just kids, and, you know, having to deal with that and having to deal with Instagram and social media, getting like backlash from that from other students who think that we're just doing too much, and having to deal with, you know, admin and the Board of Education and like different people who are in like higher positions who don't really want to see us. I'm not saying the Board of Education or admin, they don't want to see us succeed, but I'm saying in general, there are a lot of people in power who don't stand by us and don't want to listen to us and aren't hearing our demands and stuff. And so having to deal with that, and it's a lot of, you know, planning for security as well, because people think, you know, you could just go on the street and protest, but it's like, no, there are people who want to see us dead. Like, truth being told, people don't want to, like, people think we're exaggerating, but there are people who, you know, want to see us dead and don't want to see us doing any of this at, you know, at all. And so the fact of, you know, making sure that everyone is safe and secure and having security and having marshals, because we don't work with the police at all. We don't want the police in our schools, on the streets in general. So with that, we have to show that we can be safe and secure, you know, without them. So we have marshals and security, and having to plan that, and, you know, getting calls of white guys driving in these trucks, and, you know, and like on the scene and like all this stuff. It's just like, it's so much for a 17-year-old, you know, little person to handle. But I mean, like, if no one's gonna do it, we have to. And so it's just hard because I feel like it's hard because growing up, I've always felt like there's been a target on my back, because, you know, I'm a smart Black woman, like, you know, and like some people don't like that. And so it's just hard because I feel like there's always a target, just always a target. And then now having this coalition, it's like we're young and we're Black. Not all of us, but I'll say we're young and we're minority students and we're educated, you know, and so people don't like that. And so it's just, there's always a target. There's always somebody who doesn't like something, or somebody who has an opinion, or someone who wants to say something about nothing that they know about, you know, when we've sat for hours, literally working our butts off, planning everything to the smallest detail. And then somebody from the outside wants to say, that's not smart, to do that. And it's like, you know, it's just a lot of people have a lot of opinions, but don't want to help us and don't want to give us that support.
Like, you're doing work in the legacy of like the Little Rock Nine, and you're doing work in the legacy of like you know, like the children's campaign, you know, like you're doing like work in the legacy of like students who were out there in the civil rights movement, right? When schools weren't in.
Don't say that.
I'm saying it's true, Victoria. Like, when students weren't in school, like during the summer, they were out in the streets, like right alongside the adults protesting, right? They were doing exactly that, right? So what you're doing is definitely in line with that legacy, and it's beautiful. And we have groups, like you said, Organized 2020, who is a part of the NCAE Educators Union, and they are the social justice, racial justice caucus of NCAE, and they've been doing powerful work here in North Carolina for years now, pushing back against the budget cuts that our school systems are seeing, and also right alongside students, advocating for there to be a safe and healthy reopening plan for schools, right? Which is a really big topic of conversation, as well as the racial justice piece. Yeah. So what has that looked like as far as the work that y'all been doing around getting schools to reopen in ways that actually take into account minority students as well as minority teachers and teachers in general?
I think the teacher texted me or sent a DM or something, and they were like, I want to know your opinion on opening schools. And I was like, wait, I hadn't even had my brain, I hadn't had a chance to even process like that, because I was just so like focused on SLROs and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, honestly, I haven't done my research. I don't really know much. Like, first off, it sounds crazy to begin with, because, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic. But I was like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess it'll be like, you know, I just hadn't had a chance to think about it. And so I sat down and I talked to my team. And we had reached out to a few teachers that we know, and kind of get hearing from them, listen to them. My dad, he's also a teacher as well. So I was talking to my dad and my mom about that and like what they think. And truly, just like before I say, oh, don't open schools, or oh, open, like whatever my opinion was going to be, I was like, I wanted to have knowledge on it, not just assume something. And I think it's funny because a lot of people think that we just or angry and we just want to go protest just to like, I don't know, just to like be mad and get out in the middle of a pandemic that's like killing, I don't know. And so it's just crazy. And so I had to spend like a good like minute like being like, before I say whatever, let me like have my facts down and like make the decision for myself. And so I was talking with one of my executives at large, Gracie Stacer, and I was like, she was like, Victoria, I think we should definitely like come out with an opinion on this because people are looking to us because we're students. We're the ones who have to go back in these classrooms. So I think it'd be powerful if we like made a statement about it. And so we were like, talking to my team, we'd done some more research and stuff, and kind of came to the conclusion that they given us like plan A, plan B, and plan C. And so plan A is, I don't know if you heard, but it's like reopening schools totally. Plan B is it's like you can do virtual, or they're still going to reopen schools, but it's like you can sign up for virtual, or you can do like first semester virtual, and their school year you can do like in class, or you can do straight just online. Like, so essentially we were like, you know what, like people aren't gonna like this, but we have to do plan C because we had spoken to so many teachers and they're telling us like it's not safe. You know, my dad is a teacher and I don't want it to be a guessing game of, you know, well, we'll see, maybe, you know, there's still COVID cases going on, but we'll just hope and pray that, you know, a student just doesn't have COVID and they won't share it with the entire school. Like, I don't want my life to be dependent on a hope and a prayer. And, you know, I'm Christian, so I pray to God, you know, I do all that, but it's like still like that chance of my life being dependent, like that's stupid. Like, why should I go back into a building which low-key barely has any AC working? Not to shade, but like, you know, we have like, it's so funny. I made a post on Instagram like I think it was today or yesterday. And I was like, essentially like it's funny because our school made like a roaches, like it was like Enlo roaches, like an account, an Instagram like meme account for like roaches in our school. Like that's like, what? Like, you know, it's like, it blows my mind how some people think that we can be safe and clean when like the water isn't barely clean at school. You know, it's like these small little things, and you guys want to open schools in the middle of a pandemic. And I was blessed because I signed up for virtual academy. You know, I did that, so I'm good. But it's like, we shouldn't open schools in general for the fact that Black and brown students, like most of the people working essential jobs are black and brown parents and families. And so it's like the fact that that's already a high risk of exposure, and bringing that to your family or whatever it may be, and then, you know, having to go to school and having to sit in classrooms, and even it makes no sense. It's like, I don't want to question. I want there to be a definite answer of COVID is eradicated in North Carolina. Let's open schools. Not there's still some COVID cases going on, but we think it's safe. We'll see what happens because maybe it's like, I don't want that. So it's funny because teachers they've been behind us, like, or at least majority, the ones we've spoken to have been behind us saying like, yes, like this is a good plan. Honestly, I think between teachers and students, like we should be the one making the decisions for our lives, not people who are at home, you know. And they had a letter like pre-written in case a student or teacher died from COVID, and they were going to send it out to parents and students and all. Like you're already preparing for someone to die. Like that's horrible. Like why are we we should be avoiding death, not going toward, like that makes no sense. And so it's just like people want to undermine the fact that like of how serious this is. And so it's funny because people will say, well, I don't understand why you're going out protesting if we're in the middle of a pandemic. Like I don't understand, I don't get it. And it's like, we've tried to send emails, we've tried to have them listen to us, but it's like everything we do, no matter how hard we send emails, or we had a social media storm, like where we were trending on like Twitter and stuff with like Black Students Matter, and it's like even then they still don't listen to us. So it's like we don't want to have to go to school. We rather go out and protest and be in the open air with the, you know, and like be spaced out to some degree than be in a cramped classroom with the AC barely working on and these hot masks and stuff, trying to study but like trying to do work and stuff but worrying about the girl beside you coughing up a storm. Like you know, it's like these, I'd rather go out and protest than do that, you know. And so it's so much stuff that doesn't make sense, where they one minute they say that, oh, we don't have enough funding, but then I think it was oh gosh, I'm probably gonna get this wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was Wake County Public School Systems, their annual budget is $1.8 billion a year. So it's like you have money or you don't. Like it just like doesn't make sense to me. And so they're putting money into
are out of whack. It sounds like that their priorities out of whack. They're choosing other things to do because capitalism, because they want to make money off of teachers, off of students going back to school. That they want to, but don't want to invest. But actually, don't want to invest in the students and the teachers. Actually, keep it running. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm like legally allowed to say this, but like, you know what? At the end of the day, by them doing this, like they're radicalizing a bunch of students. So like, okay, like okay, like that's cool, I guess. Like, you know, and so it's really making us like open our eyes because I am 17. I'm like applying for college apps now. I'm like trying to finish like because the ACT was canceled like for in July. So it's like I'm trying to like figure out when I'm gonna do it again, and like it's just like all this stuff in my mind. Yet I'm also doing these people's jobs for them and not getting paid. Like, I wish I got paid to do this. I wish I got paid to sit here and do research, but I'm not. Like, I'm doing it because it's my life at stake and it's other students' lives at stake. So it's like, you don't have to pay me because I'm doing this for the betterment of like us and our livelihood and us being able to breathe, you know? And so it's just, it blows my mind with some people's priorities, but it's like, I have mine in check. My board, we have ours in check. People behind us have theirs in check. And so we're going to keep pushing until they listen to us.
When people ask, why would you defund the police? I ask them in return, why would you pay for your own executioner? Why would you find the rope that best fits your own neck? Why would you give your body to something that never wanted to hold you? Why would you find enjoyment in tasing yourself? Why would you lay down and let someone find excitement in putting pressure on your neck? Why would you be an active participant in profiling? Why would you let someone use you like Tinder and swipe away your soul? Why would someone make a soundtrack out of black bodies hitting pavements? Why make a deal with the devil and let the funeral home steal your savings? Why would you sign up for your own candlelight visual just to die from running a stop sign or a petty crime that was minuscule? Why become another name that's spray painted on the corner? Why become another toe tag that's left at the coroners? Why turn the other cheek when your opponent keep throwing punches? Why let someone brown paper bag test you, like your free school lunches? Why defund the teachers and applaud the killers? Why does dark skin make me a villain? Why does your mistakes always lead to me to giving you forgiveness? Why does your mistakes make my life feel useless? Why do you have such a hard time understanding the concept of defunding the police when the police has always been rooted in stealing away black bodies? Been rooted in shackling black joy and handcuffing our smiles, been rooted in white supremacy. The badge ain't nothing but a white sheet on a joyride. It's a shepherd protecting all the white sheep and serving eviction notices to the black ones. It's rooted in valuing property over people. It's rooted in viewing people as property. It's rooted in law and order, rooted in finding the slave and handing them back to the slave owner. It's rooted in tearing apart families and give two fucks about intervention. The police is nothing but a battering ram in black households. I've seen it knock down everything that stands in its way, and that includes doors, babies, children, mothers, fathers, men, women, trans. Hell, it don't care as long as all these black bodies stay under police control. And yet you wonder and got the nerve to ask me, why would you defund the police? Well, I got the nerve to ask you, why not?
This is Matt Meyer for People Strike Broadcast. Excited now to have three of the most dedicated educators and social change leaders from three key cities, Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago. Really excited to introduce Melina, Abullah, Bernard Gassaway, and Marvin Garcia, three people I'm honored to call friends. I'm going to say very, very brief mini biographies of each of them, because if I were to even just talk about each of their contributions to the movement and to the community, that would take up all our time. So just in tremendous brief synopsis, Melina Abullah is professor and former chair of the Department of Pan-African Studies at California State University, Los Angeles. She's a national leader of Black Lives Matter and a co-founder of BLM's LA chapter. A self-described womanist, scholar, activist, Abullah is co-host and co-producer of Pacifica Radio KPFA's KPFK's weekly program, Beautiful Struggle. A beautiful friend and leader, Melina Abdullah. Bernard Gassaway is an award-winning and distinguished educator, author of Education Denied, Children, Challenges, Choices, and many other books. He's the former principal of Brooklyn's notorious Boys and Girls High School and former senior superintendent of New York City Alternative High Schools and Programs, where I used to work. He's my former boss. He's also a former student of one of the more notorious schools in New York City. And coming up from there to becoming a Columbia University Revson Fellow and lifelong community advocate, he writes that his most cherished role is that of being a father. And finally, Marvin Garcia cut his teeth as teacher and principal in Chicago's independent Pedro Albizu Campos High School, deeply rooted in the Puerto Rican community there. Never leaving that community, Garcia has served as director of the Praxis Project of the National Alternative Schools Network. He's a leader of the Community as Campus Community Action Council for the Chicago Public Schools, and is currently a member of the Board of Trustees of Northeastern Illinois University. Welcome.
Okay. So I think that this is a moment when the world is cracked wide open, right? When, you know, we can really either seek to return to a world where Black folks, brown folks, poor folks, indigenous folks continue to experience the kind of oppression that we experienced prior to the health pandemic, right? We can seek to return to another pandemic, right, that we lived under constantly, or we can usher in new visions of the world. We can engage our radical imaginations. And I think that, you know, when we think about the murder of George Floyd and the uprisings that came as a result of the theft of his life, but also in honoring his tremendous spirit, really what we see is a desire, I think, among many folks to say that we are not going to go back to business as usual. And we're also not going to waste time tinkering around the edges of systems that were intentionally and deliberately designed to produce the outcomes that they do, right? So it's not accidental that George Floyd and that Black people more broadly, you know, George Floyd represents a tremendous last straw on the camel's back, right? And I think it's really important that we think about what that means. So I think for many of us, as we witnessed Derek Chauvin, the murderous officer who stole the life of George Floyd, kind of invoke the most evil and horrific of his forebears, right? You could see when we say that police evolved from slave catching, you could see his slave catcher forebears in his eyes, right? You could see it in his actions. And I think that for many of us, we said enough with the tinkering around the edges, enough with this rhetoric of police reform. It's time for us to fundamentally transform systems into ones that actually work for us in the name of George Floyd and in the name of Breonna Taylor. And I'm in Los Angeles, so in the name of Waukesha Wilson and Kenneth Ross Jr. and A.J. Weber and so many others, we have to transform systems, and we have to, you know, as ridiculous as it would sound to say, let's reform the system of chattel slavery. If policing evolves from the system of slave catching, which is an arm, is a vestige of chattel slavery, then we also have to say the same thing that we said about abolishing chattel slavery. We have to be willing to abolish policing as we know it. And so I think that this moment is a moment when we have an opportunity to fundamentally reimagine public safety, reimagine a world, and imagine a world and usher in a world that works for everyone. And I think that that means, you know, undoing policing. In terms of education, it means establishing
our educational spaces as ones that are spaces that the first spaces of abolition, right? So police don't belong on our campuses, police don't belong in our schools, and using those resources to really invest in our children, invest in our communities, and build the kind of world that we want to live in.
I echo what Melina just said. I just wanted to start off my comments with a few names in terms of being in New York City, going back a little ways in terms of, and I'm sure each of us can do this with more than 3 or 4 names, but I'll mention the name of Eleanor Bumper, Sean Bell, Amadou Diallo, and more recently, Eric Gardner. Mm-hmm. And so the recent events is not new for many of us, particularly ones that are on this Zoom, but it seems to be for many of the people who, I guess, that are protesting. And for some of them, I'm not sure if they know why they're protesting. But when I look at the protests or participate in whatever ways I choose to participate, I continue to think that the real fight, or the fight that needs to be waged, is the one that takes place in the schoolhouses, in the classrooms. And we all know that education is a big business. And the governor of New York, Governor Cuomo, has made it clear that education from his perspective is basically childcare, is a childcare service. He says that the economy cannot be brought back in full force unless we open the schools. So I've been pushing back on a personal level and I asked the question the other day by way of Twitter, is one, what are the projected number of deaths that are expected once they decide to open up schools, face-to-face schools? And the second question is, based on the government's perspective, what is the acceptable number of deaths? Because safety of the children is definitely not at the forefront of any decisions that are being made from the government perspective, nor is the safety of the adults. So in New York City, we have mayoral control of the public school system, but yet under the pandemic, the governor has emergency powers or emergency authority. So on the one hand, the mayor says that the schools will open, and then the governor says, well, hold up, the schools may not open. And so you have school teachers and officials planning to open up schools, but then there's an announcement saying that they're not going to open up schools. So all this is doing is adding to the anxiety of not only the children and parents, but also the teachers. And so there is, simply to put, chaos and confusion around this notion of education. Frankly, sort of echoing something that Melina said in terms of what are we going back to? Are we going back to what we already had, which wasn't working for our children? So if we're going back to that, I don't understand what the rush is for that. There's this thing called remote learning. What I see is that remote learning is more of a slogan than an activity, because it's something, frankly, that has not worked to any degree in New York City. So for the most part, since March, if you would say that learning was taking place, which I could debate that prior to March, definitely after March, learning has not taken place. And I think another tragedy is that currently teachers in New York City are not even being trained to sort of master this mythology, or what they say they want to bring about is remote learning. And so I think that we're going to continue to suffer under this current system. The last thing I'll say is that as an educator of over 30 years, I and my wife at the time, we decided to homeschool our daughter. So whenever I speak about homeschooling as an option now, the powers that be seem to come out against it and say, well, that's not necessarily a good idea. Primarily because financially, it won't benefit the state. So I think that's their primary objection. And also the idea of parents having power and authority. And parents ultimately do have the power and authority of their children. Unfortunately, the powers that be convince many of them otherwise.
Wow, it's really hard to go after Bernard and Melina and their statements. And I like to say that a lot of my work has been on the ground, building a pre-K to 16 education pipeline and understanding the lack of resources and the disinvestment that already existed before COVID, before the assassination of George Floyd. And to me, there has been so much work that has been in many ways put in a pause to rethink historically that a lot of what's happening is an issue of colonialism that insists to be addressed. And here we have that moment. In Puerto Rico, we call it a coyuntura. This is a moment, like Melina said, cracked open the world. And so we need to really look at and understand that colonialism exists because it has an ideology of white supremacy. There's political repression. And the repression, it's political oppression. And then there's police repression. These are all these tenets that keep colonialism in place. And we have to shatter colonialism. So, as a Puerto Rican, seeing in my island a hurricane that devastated the island, then the earthquake that devastated the island, and then having COVID, we see under colonialism that we live under in the island of Puerto Rico, that there is need for fundamental change. And in the work that we conduct in the diaspora, here in Chicago or in New York or in Florida, but basically in the Puerto Rican community of Chicago, we have attempted to work with the police to build community policing. We engage people of our community, our youth, and we build a safety and security model in our community. Our biggest issue with that was, and is emerging, is that there are some things that are so embedded in the police, this code of silence, this subterfuge of people that run the unions, that they can only go so far, or we can only go so far with community policing. We can go further with change of structures within how the police department functions and how the policing has to change in terms of training, that it should be more of a health care department rather than a repressive department. We know the historical roots of policing. We must change that as part of a community institution, just like schools. We have to change how schools are in our community. They're not islands. They are part of our community. They're part of developing our community in terms of economic development, of safety and welfare. It's about our emotional development. It's about our culture. It's about our language. It's about our green spaces and dealing with food disparities. To have a healthy community, we have to have institutions that are healthy. And so, therefore, we still have to do our groundwork. We just had our meeting with the CEO of the Chicago Public Schools to raise the issue that schools should not open. If they are to open, we're not sure what's going to happen in terms of the consequences of exposing children, middle school students, teenagers, even those that go into universities, there is no guarantee of their safety. Every building, every school building is a COVID place, a place for explosion. There's no way to do that. And when you only have the support of a state initiative, and there is no federal support, there's no federal plan. If we open schools, we strongly believe there will be a second wave, and it will be compounded by the opening of schools, which will only extend the pain, the misery, the hurt. It will also continue to see the economy become worse. Not for those that are in power, but for those that are underserved communities and divested communities. So we laid that out to the CEO. We also laid out to some of the people that we work with in the police department, and we say we want the police department to be defunded. We also are beginning to take out police officers from our schools. Just this past month, the local school council of our major school and our initiative voted out their SRO officer. But these are steps, but we really need more fundamental change.
I want to jumpstart the conversation to what that change looks like in as concrete terms as possible in this special historical moment. You know, each of the three of you speak to extensive history, even though some of you are very young. Melina, I'm thinking of you right there. But, you know, the fact of the matter is, look, you are leaders on a national scale throughout the empire, on an international scale, but more than just certainly reform and more than just protest movements, you've also been deeply involved in building alternatives. What is that going to mean in this period? What are the kinds of alternatives that we can build in this moment?
I think that there's lots of alternatives that we can build. I think that the first step is stepping back and making sure we engage our radical imaginations and think about what kind of world we want to live in, and then how does that play out in terms of systems, right? So when we say defund the police, we also couple that call, that clarion call, with reimagining public safety. We know that more than 90% of calls to police are not violent calls, not calls about immediate threats to violence. And even those that are around questions of so-called violent crime, they're usually around responses, not ways of intervening. So it's, you know, if someone calls, it's usually because if it's a violent call, they've been sexually assaulted or they've been robbed, not that, you know, they're asking for police to intervene in the midst of a robbery or an assault, right? So when we talk about reimagining, we need to really think about what it is we're looking for in terms of public safety. And the priorities that we've seen in Los Angeles, Black Lives Matter has led an effort called People's Budget LA, pulling police out of, pulling our money out of police, right? So in Los Angeles, the mayor proposed spending 54% of our city's general fund on LAPD. And, you know, if we think about your city, Chicago and New York, those numbers aren't that far off. And, you know, we say that that's an misuse of funds. We don't need to be spending that kind of money, $3.15 billion on LAPD, and that's just, you know, a portion of what they propose to spend. That's just the general fund portion, right? And so what it looks like for us is saying, what else could we do with $3.15 billion? We could invest it in meeting the universal needs of people, right? Making sure that everybody has housing and healthcare and good jobs, and that there's quality after school programs. We could make sure that we have a built environment, like, you know, safe parks with programs that are, you know, resourced by youth workers, not patrolled by police. We could have libraries, right? We could have a safe environment, a clean environment, right? And then when we do get to questions of, safety. We can engage in a transformative justice model, right, where we center on, what survivors need in order to recover from whatever it is they've experienced. So how do we make sure that they have mental health resources? How do we make sure that they have, that there's trauma-informed care, right? And then how do we get to questions of restitution and repair, right? We also need to think about what it is we can do to prevent folks from engaging in violent acts or in so-called criminal acts in the first place. So how do we, I think about cities like Newark, New Jersey, where the mayor there, Raz Baraka, who's one of the most visionary mayors in this country, right, has said, let me pull some dollars out of police and invest it in what he calls community care teams, or community care teams that anticipate needs of communities, but also intervene, right? These are often, people who society has criminalized, but who neighborhoods might revere, right? Who are going in and saying, this is how we prevent altercations and violence. This is where we invest. And so as we think about alternatives, I think that these are really, they're imaginative, but they're also common sense, right? It's common sense that we don't deploy police because someone has a broken taillight, right? There are countries in this world that have departments of transportation and will absolutely pull someone over for having a broken taillight, but then what do? They fix the damn taillight, right? Like, it's common sense that if someone is having a mental health challenge, that they don't need people assaulting them and pushing them into a corner with guns drawn, right? What is that going to do to their mental health, right? And so it's really important that we invest in the things that communities actually need. In terms of education, one of the things we've been pushing is a complete divestment from police in schools, no more school police, and also a severing of ties from police. There is not one incident that we know of where police have actually kept school communities safer. We know that the ones who actually jump in when there's a fight on campus, and you all can hopefully co-sign, is the teachers, is the staff, is the, sometimes the parents, right, or other children, right? That's who actually intervenes and calms down questions of, conflict. And we also have to remember that in our schools, our children are children, and children will do what children do, and we have to always treat them as children. And I'm speaking not only as an educator, but as the mother of 3 public school children, 2 of whom had the police called on them in school for things that are not crimes. One had the police called on her for having slime in her pocket. That is not a crime, and police should not be called because an 11-year-old has slime. Every 6th grader has slime. It's not a big deal, right? And so these are the things that we need to think about. And then finally, what we're ushering in beyond making schools spaces of abolition, and by schools I mean both K through 12, but also universities, is thinking about how to build freedom campuses. How do we make schools sites for care for our young people, safe spaces for our young people? And we see that as, no police on campus. We see that as making them open and accessible and safe havens for our young people. And we also see that as investment in ethnic studies, which is, the discipline that actually validates, and one of the only ones that is proven to have increased the connectivity between children and students and their educational processes.
Yeah, I'll just follow with you. When we talk about reimagining schools, because there's a big push for that. We also talk about defunding police and reinvesting that money into schools. I'm actually I advocate at this point to not necessarily to reinvest funds into the public school system, particularly the public school system in New York City. Because if the public school system, let's say we're a plantation, which is probably not far from that, when we reimagine what schools should be, what we're actually doing is going to the plantation owner and telling him or her what our ideas are, and then that owner is going to still do what he or she wants to do. That's going to be in the best interest of the plantation, not necessarily in the best interest of the children. So until we can reimagine a school system where we have total ownership, then I can see us investing in it. For example, there's a great amount of the funds that go into public schools are going to national book publishers. And these book publishers are publishing textbooks that are furthering supporting the notion, the ideology of white supremacy. And these are the books that our children are being given. These are the books that our children are being told to read. So I see an immediate action would be to divest, not only from police, but divest from these corporations such as the Pearsons of the world and the Huffman, Michelin, all the other book companies that are profiting off of the backs of our children. So reimagining for me takes on a totally different look. Even schooling, as I said earlier, I decided to homeschool my daughter because we did not want to get into a position where we would have to unschool her, which is a whole another movement where you're taught lies. So now we got to reverse those lies in terms of that. So the school system or schools that I can imagine would be truly run and owned by the communities and operated by the communities. So like what Marvin mentioned when he talks about, when he was sharing with me about the community as a campus concept or something similar to that, but we not only control the curriculum, but we also control the funding that goes, and we control who's actually teaching our children. Okay, because you can have the best curriculum in the world right now, but if people who resort to their mental model, because that's what happens, you can train people all you want, but ultimately they're going to go back to their default mental model where they see that black child that's sitting in front of them or that Latino child sitting in front of them as less than human. All right, in some cases they can't even relate and don't care to relate to the people who are sitting in front of them because they're protected in some cases by teachers unions who really, and from my experience, they represent the interests of the adults, not the interests of children.
Well, if we were to defund the police and defund the Pentagon, I believe for my community, we could expand pre-K. We could put people in our community in teacher training programs, in principal programs. We could have people that work in institutions of education in our community investing in our community. They live in our community, they get a salary, and they spend their money in our community. What's happening now is people from outside of our community that don't know our community, don't relate to our community, are getting a paycheck, and then we're building their community. So I think that's critical. We have to strengthen our neighborhood schools. We have to have options. We have to eliminate the private schools that are getting public dollars and going into pockets of individuals. So we have to eliminate these profiteering schools. We have to have high schools that provide different career paths for students. Not everybody's going to go into a four-year liberal arts education. Not everybody's going to go to city colleges and get into a program there. Not everybody's going to get into a trades program. So we got to build our schools around what are the interests of the students and their careers. I also believe at the university level, state universities should defund, get rid of their police. and their police departments. At Northeastern Illinois University, we have like a $2.2 million budget for the police, $500,000 for any kind of supportive services for our students. So universities get two pots of money. They get money from the state, they get an allocation, then they charge tuition. We don't need to charge tuition. If we were to defund the police, defund the Pentagon, there's so much that we could do. Therefore, we will not see students in debt until they're 50 years old. We don't need that. What we need is for people to live their lives and commit to their communities and develop their communities. But we're not allowing that to happen. We're not allowing for communities to fully develop as institutions or places where people can actually self-actualize their full potential.
I know that both some of you have to go and we have to conclude, even though you guys are visionaries and could teach us all for many, many more hours. But some very brief closing words and comments, please.
I would add this in terms of closing, or is that the notion of care, and this is something that I borrow from others, but care could mean children are reason enough. Our children are reason enough for us to fight for them, and at all costs, and in the words of Malcolm X, by any means necessary, create conditions from which they can learn and grow, and not necessarily mimic what we've done in the past, but to do better. Because I believe that if we sort of we just release them from being inhibited, because I think sometimes what we do is we project, as adults, we project our fear onto our children, and then they grow up to be fearful rather than being fearless. And I think that that's what we're going to need to be able to do in order to move forward as a people in this country and in this world.
Well, the way I see the situation with defunding the police and the situation with the COVID and the reopening of schools leads to like a bigger, broader discussion about justice. And so we got to take a look, and we have to have changes. We have to get the children out of cages at the border. That is disgusting. That is one of the things that hurts me the most. And we have to build a national conversation about racial justice, defunding the police, getting kids out of cages. We got to discuss having a national healthcare system. We have to slowly shut down prisons. We have to take away the profit motive from prisons. We have to build a struggle of solidarity so we can address these issues, and then build on important things that bring us together. Working in the Puerto Rican community, or living in the Puerto Rican community since the 70s, I was engaged by people from Puerto Rico living here around colonialism. And I had to learn about my own colonial reality, not from the public school system, by activists. And there are many activists that took many different means to get Puerto Rico free. Some went the political route. Some took up arms. Others did what they could. Here in our community, what we knew is that we were living internal colonialism, and it was not going to, the systems and the institutions were not going to address our needs for freedom and independence. So we began to create our own institutions. We created our own pre-K daycare. We created a high school. The high school is going to be 50 years in the making in the next 2 years. We'll be celebrating that 50th anniversary. We've created literacy programs. We put together housing programs to fight off gentrification. We have also put together a health program within the community combating diabetes, hypertension. We work with storefronts and supermarkets so we can develop a way to address food disparities. And then community gardens. We put a greenhouse in our school. We continue to work with other community agencies and other partners that work with us to build what we call the enclave in Chicago, Paseo Boricua. If you are to go down Division Street a quarter mile to the park, you will see a Puerto Rican arch flag welcoming people to see what we have built with our own sweat equity, with our own raising of funds, that we have been able to build an enclave there of services for the community. Yes, we have also reached out and we have worked with the public school system. We participated in electoral politics. We have participated in many different types of solidarity groupings. But the idea is, and the goal has always been, that we build institutions that address the needs of the community and also could be a model for a free Puerto Rico. So that's what I've been part of. And yes, it's under attack. It's under attack by the gentrifiers, but we stand firm. We have our partners. We work together, and we have a major organization called the Puerto Rican Agenda, which the work that I do is the education platform for this major organization in our community, which also includes work around health and with the hospitals, economic development with restaurants and small businesses in the community, arts and culture, and our museum that we help to establish in our community, working with the youth and civic engagement, immigration reform, building solidarity with the Mexican community, and the struggle for racial justice and against the police, as we have worked in solidarity with the Black community. So this is the big, broader agenda that we have created in our community. And now there is a Puerto Rican agenda in New York, in Florida, and other places where Puerto Ricans reside, building a national work around Puerto Rico and in support of the situation in Puerto Rico today.
I'll just say that this is a moment when we have to stand up, right? So we know that there's two directions we can go in, right? We can either go back to an oppressive system that will continue to really ramp up its oppression and, ride the backs of Black people in particular, and, continue to oppress people of color and poor folks generally, right? Or we can take this moment and usher in our most courageous and radical visions. The only way we're going to get what it is we imagine is by fighting for it. And I think that this opening is an opportunity for us to fight. We can't be lulled to sleep. We have to be willing to stand up. We have to be willing to fight. And so I would say, let's fight. I would say, get with an organization. I would say, don't submit to the kind of, and I don't use the word fascism lightly, but don't submit to the fascism that we're seeing when we think about what's happening in Portland, what's being rolled out in Chicago with federal troops literally disappearing our people. The only solution to this is more people. We need more people on the streets. We need to engage in this work with our whole selves. And I also believe in the mantra that many of us share in organizing space, in unionized space, in social justice and racial justice space, that when we fight, we win. When we fight, we win. So we have to keep up the fight and redouble our efforts to get free.
Hi, my name is Drew Drake. I am a poet, and today I am reading a piece called Searching My Rage. I hope you enjoy it. Today, I let my rage be beautiful. Felt no need to dress it up. Did not care how it looked or what ground it shook. I just let it be. And it was beautiful. Today, I let my rage be powerful. Left these hands to pray in a clenched fist. Left this face to smile with a tightened jaw. I took to the streets in strength and love to answer freedom's call. Today, I let my rage be truthful. I let it tell me I was tired. I let it explain to me the term exhaustion. Let rest become my granny. Started saying stuff like, baby, you better close that front door before you let all my good air outside. I realized what a privilege it is to breathe good air when many of my family members have died. Today, I let my rage be a sounding board. Let it listen to all the times oppression made its home in this body. Times where the road ahead grew into a fork in the road. Sometimes I question my choices, and other times I wonder why God seems to leave us such limited options. Today, I let my rage be joyful. Let my rage sound like a soul clap. My rage can sound like Nuck If You Buck. Sound like Cash Money doing it for the 99s and 2000s. Sound like Kendrick Lamar's Alright. But at the same time, it sounds like Amazing Grace. It can sound like Lift Every Voice and Sing. It can sound like We Shall Overcome. It can sound like Hold On, a change is coming. And don't this rage sound like it's a total praise? Today, I let my rage be wisdom. Let it remind me of the family that came before. Remind me of the ancestors that made the brick I step on. Remind me of the bodies that were beaten on that mortar. Remind me of the resilience that sealed this nation together. Remind me that God lives in us all, black, white, and in every color. How we make magic out of mud, communities out of clay, education out of emptiness, and still rest on the seventh day. Today, I let my rage be holy. I let it be strong. I let it be quiet. I let it be still. I let it be a dance. I let it be a cry. I let it be a protest. I let it be a sigh. I let it be. And it was beautiful. I say.